there's always this like lag in like who's making a lot of money right now. It's probably the software engineers in Silicon Valley versus like who's going to make a lot of money and like get a lot of opportunities when they graduate from college in like 4 years.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Avni. I'm really excited.
So let's just dive straight into it. I want to know how you got here. What was the first moment where you were like, I want to start a venture fund?
Wow. There were a lot of steps that happened before that. I kind of got really surgical with my like method of getting into angel investing and then that into going into VC full time. And so I think the first time I had an aha moment that I wanted to be an investor someday was when I had first moved out to Silicon Valley. So I grew up in the Midwest and I moved out here for my job with Apple. I had just gotten my dream job. I was like, I've been an Apple fangirl for life. Can't wait to get started. And as soon as I started at Apple, I almost started feeling like an outsider whenever I would hang out in San Francisco and meet founders and early startup employees. And here I was working at this huge Fortune 500 company. And I just found myself wanting to go smaller and smaller, wanting to get closer to the founder ecosystem. I was raised by an entrepreneur myself. My dad ran a small business, but it was way different in terms of the model that you see here with venture scale businesses being formed in Silicon Valley. And so it was the first time I really was exposed to what a venture-backed startup was. And I knew I wanted to be a part of that. And I thought if I'm not going to found my own company someday, then I want to be on the other side of the table making investment decisions. And really my journey into having my first venture fund started with being an angel investor. So I was halfway through my career when I kind of had this realization, but I couldn't really afford it yet to start angel investing. And I also didn't want to leave my full-time job and start working my way up the ladder in the venture industry.
Yeah.
Because I was like halfway through my career. So I was like, instead, I'm going to stay at these tech companies and build up as many skills as I can along the way as I'm building up my finances. And then as soon as I can afford it, I want to start building a track record. And after I spent basically a high growth period at Apple and went through the IPO at Snap, it wasn't like I made enough money to just leave my job and never work again, but I made enough to carve off a piece of my net worth and start investing that in startups. And I went in with a couple goals. Number one, I wanted to figure out if I was any good at it. And number two, I wanted to figure out if I would want to do it full time. And unbeknownst to me, I also didn't have a thesis. And so that was like the unsaid goal to myself was like, let me see what I gravitate toward as an investor. And then at the end of 3 years, angel investing, I had invested in 30 companies and invested in ahead of several top firms like Y Combinator and Lightspeed and more. And I had markups in my portfolio up to 36x. And all the companies at that time were doing well. And even today, only one of those companies has failed. And so that was an indication to me, like after 3 years doing it, it was like, okay, I'm decent at this. And I also am loving it. So it was giving me a lot of energy. I was doing it outside of my full-time job. I was running an angel community of people like me because I just wanted to get more people into it and was really excited about it. And it just like converged for me where I was like, I want to spend all my time on this. And I'm already spending like all my nights and weekends. So why not make this a full-time thing? So as soon as I had the track record to go and raise my first fund, I started working on that. So yeah.
That is awesome. I have so many questions. Where to even begin? I guess we'll start with the first one is like, when you started writing your checks, you said you had a job. How did you balance the two? And when did you know, okay, now that I've written enough checks, like I feel conviction to actually quit?
Yeah. So it was a 3-year journey of like angel investing with a full-time job. And when I first started, I started small. So I started with syndicates where I can rely on somebody else to source the deals and somebody else to do diligence on those deals and prepare a memo. And so I could join these syndicates and kind of look at how the deal was laid out and decide if it was worth taking a call. And then I could join a call where the syndicate lead would be like leading a discussion and like crowdsourcing Q&A with the founder. And so it was kind of like starting to angel invest with the training wheels on where like I could write smaller checks, make a few mistakes early on, ideally, or not ideally, but like theoretically, that's when you want to do it. And so I started doing that. And wait, I forget what actually I was getting at.
The moment where you're like, I'm going to quit.
Yes. Okay. So I started small and then I worked my way up. And that was like phase one was like investing through syndicates. And then phase two was, okay, I want to see if I can source these deals on my own. And I also want to see if I can perform due diligence on my own. And having run the Counsel Angel community for some time at that point, it was like my natural deal flow had grown because I had been angel investing for a while. Founders were starting to send me more founders. And then the Counsel Angel community full of operators was also sending me more deals. And so that made me feel more comfortable. Like I have a source of deal flow. It's not just I'm seeing like one deal a week and investing in like one deal every 3 weeks. You know what I mean? Or every month.
You're not relying on syndicates at that point.
Yeah. And then like phase 3 was like, okay, now like I've proven I can do all the steps as an angel investing my own money. And now I need to prove to myself that I can, fundraise and invest other people's money in startups with the same thesis. So that was the point. Like after I reached those 3 years and looked back on my portfolio and saw that I had enough success and enough stories to talk to that I would be able to raise a fund and like do a first close. That was when I knew that it was time to start angel or go from being an angel to a fund manager.
Yeah. And how long did it take for you to raise your first fund?
Oh my gosh, it's a long journey. So I'm still raising my first fund, but I'm like a little over halfway done. And it's interesting because it starts out like there are multiple periods where things speed up and then you hit a plateau and then things speed up and then you hit a plateau. And then toward the end, it seems to speed up because everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is legit. There's like, people on board. Like now I have Bain Capital Ventures backing me and a bunch of GPs at Awesome Funds. And so thank you. So that's like really helped, but it's definitely a long journey and everybody I know right now is like in the grind. So yeah.
Well, a lot of people are like, oh, like I can't start my venture journey because like it's going to take me years to go build my fund. But it's like, you've proven that, I have all these companies with markups and I've built this epic portfolio and this created deal flow for me. And you're not even finished raising your fund. You've already done all this impact and made so much progress. And I think we need to remember that, especially for people who are aspiring to potentially start their own funds one day, is like, you don't have to close out your fund to like start your journey of your career. Like it's an ongoing process. Yeah.
And I will say that I did my first close for the fund like several months in, like 2 to 3 months in. I had started having like introductory conversations with people in my close network. I had already built up a community of angel investors through the Council Angels, and that gave me like a group to go to first. And so I was able to close like 25 LPs right out of the gate through that. That said, they were smaller check writers because they were all individuals. And good thing I have a small fund, so that works for me. But yeah, that allowed me to actually get started. So I closed some of that capital, and then I started investing in like the first 10 companies because if I wanted to continue to raise from people that don't know me as well, I wanted them to be able to buy into a portfolio versus a vision. So it's definitely a journey. It's almost like a pre-seed round and then a seed round once you have something to show, and then like a Series A once you have early metrics, even though it takes like 10 years for metrics to show in venture or more. So
yeah, I mean, I don't have that patience. Like everyone who has a fund, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I'm actually really curious about angel investing because I've thought about angel investing, and I think like the main blocker is, I don't really have a net worth. So it's like, I don't think it's smart for me to just like throw my money around, but I know like a lot of founders appreciate small checks because they get like really cool people on their cap table. So do you have any advice for people who just like want to get into angel investing, but like don't know where to start and maybe don't have that high of a net worth right now?
Yeah, definitely. Like writing small checks is definitely a way to go. And a couple like tips I would give are like, be honest with the founders up front before you take a call with them. Like, hey, I'm super excited about what you're building. I would love to do a call with you. I just want to let you know that my check size is around X, whether that's 1K, 5K, whatever it is. That way they can prioritize with their time, because I know somebody that I work closely with that like took a call with a founder and then at the very end was like, okay, I really want to write a 1K check into this, and the founder's face just like dropped. And then she realized, okay, I'm never going to do that again because I don't want to like surprise them at the end when they're trying to raise like $1 million. And so, but I will say that like founders are open to that. So and it helps if they're pitching a group at the same time, either through a syndicate where a bunch of people are pooling together into one investment vehicle, or through an angel community. So shameless plug, you can join the Council Angels, and we let founders pitch groups of angels at one time. That way, if they get like $5,000 checks, that's meaningful to them and their fundraise. And then we have some bigger check writers in the group too. And so they can start adding it together, and it's like, I got a 60K check, and then I got like 3 5K checks, and I walked away with 75K after 1 hour pitching the Council Angels, and really only a 15-minute pitch for them and like a follow-up call. So so those sort of things are helpful. And the Council Angels isn't the only angel community out there. There are multiples like that are really helpful for just like making sure it's a really good use of the founder's time. And I would say that people have way more to add to the cap table than they think they do, beyond money. So like founders are definitely, they're excited to get people on board that have connections to potential customers. So like if you're in a role where you work closely with the head of HR or the CFO at your company, like that's you have an in route to make connections, or if you are that person, like you can make connections for them. They also love, when you have any operating experience, and some of the things that we do every day, or I did every day as an operator before having my fund, like you would be surprised how relevant they are. Like even running an all hands, like having an employee engagement tool, doing performance reviews, hiring, firing, like those sort of things you can advise a founder on. They may have never even seen those things before. So it's completely foreign to them. And so those are areas where you can add value, whether or not your skill set is like product, marketing, growth, finance, engineering. There's always something you can add. So I would just encourage anybody listening here, like you have a lot to add. So just be clear about that, and then founders are normally excited about it. So
yeah, no, that's really encouraging. And it also feels like because you have this community of angels, you kind of have built this coalition of like a bunch of diverse skills that anyone, any company in your portfolio can access that.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome. How did you have the intuition to do that? Like, I know there are a few more communities like this, but I feel like you started this like way earlier, way back when it wasn't standard. And also you were saying like that wasn't even the goal at first. The goal was just like to find other people who are similar to you that you could relate to. Yeah, I want to hear more about like that journey.
Yeah, definitely. So it honestly wasn't just me. So as soon as I had decided to start angel investing and I had read multiple books, I had started to invest in syndicates. I wanted to step out on my own. I literally didn't know any other women or full-time operators that wanted to be angel investing outside of their full-time jobs. And so I went to a founder event and I mentioned it to one of the panelists, Sarah from Rupa Health. Afterward, I was like, I just started angel investing and I'm looking for a community. And she was like, oh, you should chat with my friend Courtney. Courtney at that time was a chief of staff at First Round, and her friend Annabelle had just left Open Door as their head of people ops and was working at the Assembly, a working space. RIP for anybody listening to this that is from San Francisco. But she was their chief people officer. And so I got in touch with the two of them. They were experiencing the same problems, and they also knew like another 8 people that were experiencing the same problems and had little pockets of deal flow, but didn't actually feel that they had enough. And so we all got together. I ended up being a founding member of the Council Angels. So there were like 10 of us working at companies like Square and Slack and Airbnb and Lyft, and we all just started sharing deals. And naturally, I was like, I'm obsessed with this. I want to get more involved. At that time, Courtney was taking on a partner position at Sousa Ventures. And so Annabelle and I teamed up to kind of lead the charge and ended up growing that community through zero marketing, just by like word of mouth and our members wanting to invite their friends. We ended up growing to like 80 members. And then most recently, we just opened it up to public applications in our last cohort like a quarter ago, and now we have over 100 members. So it's really exciting, but honestly, it just came from personal need and like finding other people that had the same need as me. And then from there, it just like clicked. It was like there was no question of like, do people need this or do we want to do this? It was like, we have to do this because everybody's clamoring for it. So yeah.
I mean, literally me and all my friends were like, how do we angel invest for so long? So like now I want to join now. Like that sounds so awesome.
And we also do a lot of like free semi-public events too, where like today we did a legal 101 where we had one of our friends, Christina, who was a lawyer at Cooley, come in and talk about like safes and convertible notes and pre and post money valuations and things like that trip people up. When they're first starting to angel invest, they feel like it's so complicated and there's all this lingo, but actually it's not that complicated. Like VC math is pretty straightforward, and we seek to just demystify that through all these different content things that we put on.
No, that's amazing. I mean, as a founder who has raised, I still get confused by all those terms. Yeah. So like that's real.
Yeah, it's good for founders too, for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, no, so cool. And let's like dial back a little bit into, pre-raising your fund. You were an operator at like some of the coolest tech companies, and especially like, being exposed to the tech environment at that point. Like, what is like the one thing that you like loved about it, and what was like one thing you didn't love so much about it that like potentially even projected you into like more venture?
Yeah. Okay. So the thing that I loved the most about it, particularly in the back half of my career, was people management. So, management, I don't love that word, but like, I just love like developing talent. I like advocating for other people. I'm a team player. And so, I have some people I've met through like prior jobs where it's like, every single job, there's like 1 to 2 people who are like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I met that person. They're like the most talented person that I'll meet in my life. And like, And I definitely want to work with them again. And so like meeting those sort of people and getting to work with them day in and day out, and in certain cases like being their manager and getting to create new opportunities for them and then like advocate for my team, like that was all exciting for me because I just like to put other people on a pedestal. And so in some ways, I think that translates to working with founders where it's like, it's all about the founder. How can we support them and like advocate for them, especially when we're like sharing their deal with other VCs and things like that. But I miss like I think that daily like rapport where it's like we have a daily stand up with our team and like we're moving ahead on a project. Like that's really fun. But I would say the thing that I was missing in my operating role was decision-making power. So, and I think this happens to a lot of operators. And really, unless you're the CEO of a company, you're almost always stacking the table for somebody else to make a decision. Like even if you're the CFO, even if you're the COO, like you almost always need sign off from somebody to get something done. And so no matter how high I got up in my career, it was like, I can write a document explaining why I think this is a good idea and put my recommendation at the bottom, but ultimately like the board is going to decide or the CEO is going to decide. And so angel investing, that was like, I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's one of the things that made it most attractive to me because I started to think, wow, if I ever did like get promoted, you know, in my dream world, like into a CEO position, or if I started my own company, would I actually have the confidence at this point after 10 years of operating and never being like the solo decision maker? Would I have the confidence to step into that role? Wow. Because you don't get that opportunity very often. And so that to me was like a huge like unlock when I started angel investing and then venture investing is just like exercising that muscle of like, oh, okay, I'm going to decide where this $5,000 go. And even today, it's like, I'm going to decide where this $100,000 is going to go. And like being comfortable with that and trusting myself that I've, you know, dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's is like gratifying to me. So yeah.
No, like having trust in yourself is one of the most powerful things. It's also the literal most scariest thing you can do as well. And it's really difficult to develop and flex that muscle without practice. And I do feel like even when I was working in big tech, like I didn't really get to flex that muscle very often. Totally. And I definitely like resonate with what you were saying of the feelings of lack of autonomy and like struggling to find that. And yeah, I guess you just gotta have to go do your own thing then. Like what else can you possibly do? But no, that's really interesting. And what were like some of the, you know, types of roles that you were doing at these companies, and how do you feel like the skills you built there like translate into your current day-to-day of investing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my roles were almost always operationally focused. So first half of my career was at Eli Lilly and then Apple and Snap, focused on medical devices and at Eli Lilly, and then the iPhone at Apple, and then spectacles at Snap. So all hardware. Oh, wow. And so I was like interfacing with supply chain, logistics, and manufacturing. I was spending like 90 days a year in China, and always in an operations role. Like I was planning a development build at Apple, like prototype, engineering build, design validation build, like trying to get ready for mass production of the new iPhone for like 6 months out of the year. And then the previous 6 months, I'd be like spending time strategizing just for all those development builds. And so that was like the first half of my career. And then the second half of my career was more focused on software and go-to-market, again at Snap, and then Cruise, self-driving car company, and then Atmos, which is in like real estate and construction tech. And throughout all those experiences, it was like toward the end, I became head of operations at Atmos. And then like at Cruise, I was leading a team of people that was focusing on piloting our self-driving cars as a delivery service in Phoenix, Arizona through a partnership with Walmart, and then preparing for our rideshare launch in San Francisco. And so throughout all these roles, like I was just interfacing with very legacy industries. Like you wouldn't know it if you looked on my LinkedIn because you'd just see all these like flashy names. But really like first half of my career, it was manufacturing, logistics, and supply chain. And then second half of my career, it was transportation and construction. And then even early on at Eli Lilly, like interfaced a little bit with healthcare systems in terms of just the regulatory side of everything. And it just opened up my eyes. A lot of these industries are still doing their work in like outdated tools that look like they were made in like 1997 sometimes, or they're using spreadsheets to do everything. There's a lot of room for human error, or they're doing everything via phone calls and emails. And so I looked at the like tools that I was using in my daily work at all these tech companies, and we were using like Slack and Notion and Airtable and all these great tools. And then like I start working with our partners, and it's like I just got reverted back 20 years. And so today as an investor, I focus on those legacy industries, and I end up investing in a lot of vertical SaaS that's focused on those areas, or AI and machine learning that is focused on like improving efficiency or creating infrastructure that will kind of equalize all industries. And so that, like, I think just having those insights throughout my career is what really like led to me investing in these spaces today.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, no surprise that you're having all these markups on your companies. You have like a very niche and deep insight into an industry that needs so much technology and automation to get to where like the rest of like software and SaaS is today. So yeah, that makes sense. And that's really cool that you're able to like use that like unique strength that you have and bring it to like the next phase of your career that you're excited about.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you think it's exciting because a lot of people are like, that sounds really unsexy and really unglamorous. I'm like, yeah, it is. And I love that. So,
but you have made it almost glamorous with like the community aspect of things. Totally. Because as like a young person who wants to get into that, I am now like interested in you and what you're doing and want to be involved in that. And the reality of the situation is oftentimes the thing that on paper is seemingly sexy that's obvious to you is obvious to like the rest of the world. And so it's like much harder for you to have like a unique insight about something that's like more obvious. And so, you know, as a woman who like would hopefully one day am able to give back and like invest more into like other founders, I would hope that I have some sort of unique perspective of the world so that like there is some unique value add that I'm adding about how I see the world, not just like doing it because I'm copying everyone else or like it's obvious. So congrats, you've made the like unsexy sexy.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And it is, you know, investing really early in massive industries that are like existential and pretty much recession proof is sexy to me. So,
that's where the money is.
Yes.
So cool. Well, I want to know more about like outside of investing on day to day. You're also like very active on Twitter. You've built a massive audience there. Like I want to hear about what it's like actually balancing posting and maintaining your brand on Twitter and then just doing all the million amazing things you do outside of that.
Yeah, so I would just say there's always pressure to do more. And on Twitter specifically, I feel like I was on there just like lurking for 2 years. And I was like, oh, I should create content, not consume content. And just like saying that again and again to myself, but like feeling really nervous to start posting and like saying what was on my mind. I'm also like a big thinker and I don't always say out loud what I'm thinking and sometimes need time to like digest certain things and like synthesize my like take on something. And so it feels like high pressure to be like, oh, wow, should I put that out there? And so I just started, again, like the decision making, like started flexing the muscle and just being like, all right, I'm going to just start putting stuff out there. It's low stakes. I don't have many followers right now. And if I do something bad and nobody likes it, like I'll just delete the post or I'll just not delete it and not care. Like who cares? Yeah. And so slowly over time, I think because my like focus and passion has always been about like democratizing things and demystifying things like angel investing, that's naturally like a topic that I gravitated toward. And I think people are just clamoring for information about that. And so they resonated with my content. And honestly, I'm not on like a big schedule or anything. Like I find myself posting a lot on like Fridays and doing like a thread because it's like I've had a week of just a lot of things happening. Like every 30 minutes I'm meeting with somebody new and like having an incredible conversation, whether it's a co-investor or an angel from our community or a founder or an LP. And so I try to like download some of that at the end of the week and just share my takeaways. And literally most weeks I end up not posting anything on any like big thing. And it's just like little stuff. But when I do like actually put thought into something and put it out there, those tend to do really well. And I try to just go straight off my head. I feel like if you try to like word tweak a million times, like it's not genuine anymore and it's not going to get engagement anyways. So I just like started removing that pressure from myself, and over time it just got easier with repetition. So, and then like balancing throughout the week, I don't have my own podcast right now. And so it's nice to come on podcasts like this, where it's like, you know, you set it up and you have this following and like, I'm able to come and have an awesome conversation with you. And I prioritize that like in my schedule to do these sort of things because I think it's important to reach new audiences with our message and hopefully inspire someone. And yeah, I think my weak points are like LinkedIn. I sometimes get a lot of engagement on LinkedIn, but I just don't feel as comfortable on LinkedIn. So like,
oh no, you're sleeping on LinkedIn.
I'm sleeping on it. Yeah. So I'm like, that's like next on my list. I'm like, I already post so much content on Twitter. Why not literally just copy it? Yeah, I know.
Copy it.
It just feels like a different house, like a different environment. You know what I mean? So
well, here's a hack. Just like take your tweet and put it on ChatGPT and say, can you reform
LinkedInify.
LinkedInify it. And it actually works really well.
Okay, I'm gonna do that.
I haven't done that before, and I will get like quadruple the amount of likes on LinkedIn than Twitter, to be honest.
I know. Honestly, I used
crazy.
to, because I used to just post random like work stuff on there, and
Yeah.
it was actually going well. So now that I'm running my own fund, I should bring that back.
Yeah. And we're both founders, right? And every eyeball on what we're building is just as important and valuable. So yeah, I'll get them anywhere.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So no, that's really awesome. And I feel like one thing that really resonated with me that I've been trying to tell like other people who have asked me for advice, and mostly because I did this wrong for a while, whereas I had a lot of people telling me you should like create like an account and like build an audience, and they're like, you can pick Twitter or LinkedIn or TikTok, just like pick one. And I was like, I have nothing to share. Like I've not done anything in the world, and I'm not.
That's
I'm not
BS.
like, yeah, it's totally BS because everyone has something to share,
so
and everyone has a unique experience that they can talk about that other people can benefit from. But it took me so long for me to realize this until I started forcing myself to create stuff, and then I would sit and I'd be like, what do I know? What do I know? And think about it. I think I'm like, I guess at one point I got a job. We'll start there, you know? And it's crazy how much people can like resonate with that and can actually find your experience and like what you've learned in building up yourself actually so valuable. So it's really just a matter of like being open-minded and starting, like you said.
Yeah, totally. And being vulnerable too. Yeah. I feel like people want to relate with you. And if you're just like, oh, everything's always perfect, I'm always winning, like people are like, wait, what? But when you're like, here's how I tactically like broke down this problem and did something about it, that's like really nice for people. So
yeah. And you moved from where? From San Francisco to San Francisco?
I moved from Indiana to San Francisco.
Okay.
So yeah, big change.
Yeah. Tell me about that change. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it was very different. So I grew up in the Midwest. I was like born and raised in Ohio till I was 8 years old, and then lived in Indiana from that age on until like all the way through college, my first job at Eli Lilly, and then I moved out here for the job with Apple. I didn't know anybody in the state of California, and actually at that time in my life, I thought that I wanted to move abroad. I just wanted to get out of Indiana. I have nothing against Indiana. Now when I go back, I love it, but I had just always like lived in the same region, and so I wanted to see something different. And I ended up getting this job offer out of nowhere to come and work for Apple. This was like before I was a big user of LinkedIn. It was like, 2014 or something. And I had a message just like sitting there for 3 months from a recruiter at Apple. And I just like happened to see it once when I was like home for the weekend, like visiting family on LinkedIn.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, literally
on LinkedIn again.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, like this must be spam. Cause I wasn't used to getting like recruiters reaching out on LinkedIn. And now that happens all the time, like for everyone. But at that point it wasn't really normal, at least where I was from. And so I was like, this is probably like some scam artist, but I'll just send them my resume. They can't like steal my identity with my resume. And so lo and behold, I ended up hearing back, and they invited me out to Cupertino for an interview. And I literally spent like 12 hours in San Francisco, including like when I was sleeping. I like flew into the city at night, drove across the Golden Gate Bridge and back, went straight to my hotel, and then like drove to Cupertino in the morning for my interview. And in that time, I was like, okay, San Francisco seems cool. Love the hills because Indiana's completely flat. Love the Victorian houses. The bridge was really cool. Like we don't have water and mountains around in Indiana. And so it was just like cool to see something totally different. And I was like, this feels different enough than where I live that like I don't need to go all the way to Europe to get like a different experience. And this job seems awesome too. Like I said, I'd always wanted to work for Apple. Like I guess I never really thought about actually working for Apple, but like always loved the company. And so I didn't know anybody in the state of California and ended up getting this job offer. And I was like, how can I not take it? I feel like I'll have more regrets if I don't than if I do. So I have to just do it and see what happens. So I ended up moving out here, and the rest was history. So I'm really glad I made that decision.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's wild. You're like, I guess I'll work at Apple. No, I'm kidding. But no, I can't even imagine how much of a shock that is. I grew up like nearby in the Bay Area, and I moved to San Francisco when I graduated, thinking that I was like basically moving home, and it was still so different. Like just the act of like relocating, moving your environment is like a huge change. I've also dreamt of like doing the abroad Europe stint, and multiple times growing up, and now I'm like, you know what, I'll just go vacation there. It's like really a lot to go do that. I feel already like my life is like pretty novel, just traveling within US, and like even like I was like, I'll just settle and like go live in New York for a few years. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to come back home. Yeah. Like that was a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
So that makes sense. Cool. And Tell me more about like your time in SF. What was the most shocking thing?
Okay, wow. The most shocking thing. I think it was like the first shocking thing was like you can get a juice for like $12. So yeah, I think, but honestly, yeah, I mean, shocking. I'm trying to think what doesn't shock me anymore that did shock me back then. I think it was going from being in Indiana where I studied engineering and I studied mechanical engineering. But after school, I like went to this huge engineering school, Purdue, and then I moved back home. And it was like anytime I was out with friends, I'd be like the only engineer in the group, whether it was like men or women. Like I'd always be the only engineer in the group, and like working with a lot of other people. At work, I worked with a lot of engineers, but just like going out, you didn't really meet many technical people. Yeah. And then I moved here, and it was like everyone's an engineer, but like software engineer, and so that was just really cool to just see like everybody's building something here. And like has something they're really passionate about that they want to talk about. And people are really grinding it out here. And it's kind of exciting because they're passionate about it. And yeah, and just like how technical people are, I think that was really exciting for me, just like going from being a minority in that way to like all of a sudden being like, oh, wow, I'm a cog in the machine, and kind of in a good way, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And how did you know you wanted to do mechanical engineering?
Oh, good question. So I'm just a really stubborn person, and I was in like high school. I was one of the top like math and engineering students, not to brag. It was a high school of 3,000 people. So I'm proud of that. But
that you should brag about that. Yeah, that's really impressive.
I was a total nerd. Like I was in this one math class where the math teacher would put up like the top scoring quiz on the wall every single time we had a quiz, and my quizzes were like all around the top of the room. So anyways, my math teacher my senior year sat me down, and she was like, I just want you to know that like you're one of our top math students, and I think that you should consider engineering. There aren't many women in it. You seem to have the skill set. And I had never really thought about it before. You're like so disconnected, at least I was, from like the college world and the real job world post-college. And I think I also took a career assessment that my parents wanted me to take, and it was like, you should be these 3 to 5 things, and one of them was engineer. And my dad, like since he had run into his own business, he was like angling me toward that as like the stable career. But I think I really did it just because of that teacher and like that statement, there aren't many women doing it. That was like what drove me. I was like, oh, okay, then I'm going to go straight there, and I'm going to just be really stubborn about it and like get through and be really determined. So I will not say that engineering at Purdue was easy by any means. It was like, honestly, I was really happy to be done with that major. But I would just really wanted that stamp of credibility. And I got a lot out of it too. Like I learned how to think about problems differently. And I just didn't want anybody questioning my like technical ability. And I knew someday I was going to go into business, but I wanted to have that like to fall back on. So yeah.
Yeah. Wait, that's so badass, because a lot of people are like hear that there are not that many women there, and then they're like, actually, never mind.
Totally.
Versus, hey, like there's not that many women here, I'm gonna go
have to go do it now.
Like that's a very different way to like approach something like that, and that's like very rare. So I'm deep admiration. I totally understand what you mean by like not having someone question your technical ability, because I feel like when I was in the middle of college, I wasn't pursuing an engineering degree, but I basically panicked and was like, oh my God, if I don't pursue an engineering degree, I'm going to continuously be the person in the room who's not technical enough. And that is the lamest like reason to have something be in your way of like getting the thing that you want. And like, I'm curious, like I think at the time that we know, like maybe we were getting our jobs and like thinking about the stuff, this idea of being technical was a lot more prevalent and more of a pressured. But I think with a lot of the recent technological advancements and no code and AI, like this idea of being technical is like less valuable, and people are more interested in what audience do you have, like and marketing skills, which is really fascinating. So for someone like younger who's like considering what they want to do for college and potentially like where they want to move to their job, like how valuable do you think it is to be technical? And if you could answer that in the perspective of like if their long-term goal is to be a founder, right? Because I have a lot of VCs who I talk to who are like, oh, like I don't know if like you should build this, like you're not technical. But then I'll be like, wait a second, here's this engineering role that I had that proves that I'm technical, and they immediately like stop questioning me, like okay, perfect, here's my money. Yeah. And I just wonder if that's changing at all.
Yeah. So I think the culture, unfortunately, probably is like still the same, where like technical founders get put on a pedestal. And I will say that when I've invested in like a team of at least 1 or 2 technical co-founders, like they start coding so fast. They get like out of the gate, like months ahead of less technical founders. That doesn't mean that the less technical founders can't be successful. And to your point, like these no-code tools are catching up, and also AI, like being able to prompt engineer your way into it is definitely very real, and it's only going to get easier over time. And so I've been seeing this shift where like in terms of what's actually useful, I think that over time it's going to be like design, marketing, and even just like more of the creative functions so that you can actually like point AI in the right direction versus being like coding everything from scratch. That said, I think we're still in that transition period, and I still think like technical talent will always be valuable. It's just that it might look way different. And to somebody that's considering what to major in, I would also just think about, you might not have to be a software developer, but you just need to know how to talk about and work with technical products. So like a lot of the best product managers that I've worked with have been like very non-technical, but they know how to talk about APIs. They know like how to talk about back-end infrastructure of an app. They just know the lingo, and it's actually straightforward once they understand it, but they at some point had to learn what those things were. So I would just look for those sort of opportunities if you don't want to learn how to code. And I don't know, there's always this like lag in like who's making a lot of money right now. It's probably the software engineers in Silicon Valley versus like who's going to make a lot of money and like get a lot of opportunities when they graduate from college in like 4 years. And that is like still unknown to me. I think we're in this really interesting period where AI is just going to shake a lot of that up. So yeah.
Well, what do you think it's going to be? In 4 years, who do you think is going to be the highest paid job?
Oh man, that's hard. I'm very bullish on designers. My husband is a designer, so I feel very biased saying that. But I really think that like they're taking like their own craft and applying that to like what the user experience should be. And I don't know yet that AI is at that level. And I'm sure AI could, produce a bunch of wireframes and produce a bunch of visuals and say like, is this good? But you might still want a designer to like have the end say on that and be like, yeah, this is what it should look like. So yeah, I think that is a really valuable function. And and I think it's great because people that are really creative like thrive and super empathetic too. Like they're very focused on the user and like the buyer in many situations. And so tend to be like really thoughtful, creative, empathetic. So I think it's a really cool career.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like the more creative roles are actually going to be better for the future because AI is really focused on like logical, mathematical outputs. And
and it can give you options, but you still need to be a good picker.
Yeah, so. and engineering falls under, that subset as well. So that's really interesting. I obviously believe that like engineers, and I know you believe this too, there's obviously going to be need for engineers for like a very, very long time. How that role actually plays out, I guess, is unknown. But I think we have just like a lot of people who are like very confused about like where things are going. They're like, oh my God, is AI going to take all of our jobs? Like, should we even go to college at all? And it's like, okay, no. Like, let's
slow down. Yeah.
The best way, obviously, is to be ahead of it and to like be at the forefront is you have to embrace it and learn it. And then like we'll all like learn together and like figure out like what's useful. But yeah, no one knows really. Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to be replacing all of our jobs anytime soon.
Yeah, so. I don't think so either. Do you like think about this stuff when you're, writing checks to founders of like how our jobs going to look like in the future, especially if it's, specifically software for like the HR market or something like that?
Yeah. I don't think because they have so many problems to solve, even in the short term and medium term, I don't get too deep with them on like, what's your team hiring strategy in like 5 to 10 years when AI is like on a totally different level. But I do ask them less about like teams and roles, but more like what's their strategy with this rolling out? Like how did they see the world maybe in 5 to 10 years? They might not be able to break it down into like tactically what that means for their team over time. But I like to know that they have a strategy around this being like an emerging technology that is really moving fast, because I think I invest in a lot of vertical SaaS. And so sometimes AI is a second thought. It's like, they're first trying to like solve a painkiller in the market right now with some, and they can make so much positive change just redesigning a tool that was created 20 years ago. And so to me, sometimes I'm like, that's not enough. I also want to know that you're like paying attention to the like larger ecosystem and like what's happening here, and that you have a plan, or you see different ways to integrate AI either into your own internal operations or into your product that your customers can use. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you ever connect talent to founders from your portfolio company?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I've definitely made a lot of introductions from previous places that I've worked, and those networks like just give back to me again and again. So, and that's like my favorite thing. I love connecting people with other great people. So have definitely made some introductions. So yeah.
Do you connect anyone to anyone, or do you have to build a relationship with them? And like, what's particularly do you look for before you feel that conviction of, okay, I'm going to, make that intro and like go out of my way to do that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's very bespoke. I don't just like intro anybody that wants an intro to anyone. So like, by default, any founder I've invested in, I'm like, I already know that I'm super bought into you and whatever you want to, whatever direction you want to head, like I'm supporting you. And so if they come to me and say, I'm looking for a head of engineering, I'm going to go look into my network and see like who's the top like engineering leader that I know that I could introduce them to. And that has led to a lot of great conversations for them with like people who have worked at awesome companies and actually grown with them over time. And so that's the sort of thing I'll do. And then if I have an operator that reaches out to me that's like, hey, we used to work together. Sometimes it's not even somebody I worked closely with. Like sometimes like somebody who's like, left Cruise since I worked there, and they like knew of me when we were working there together. And years later, they're like reaching out and they're like, hey, I'm looking for my next opportunity. And I saw that you're in VC. Do you have any portfolio companies? If I have a portfolio company that is looking for that particular role, I'll reach out to somebody who's worked with that person before and see like, were they strong or not? But if it's somebody I've worked with directly and they're like interested in new opportunities, I definitely look into my portfolio first in terms of like who could use that hire. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I bet like you get some of the stuff from Twitter, and I'm sure that one of the assets that you can bring to your portfolios is like, hey, like I have access to this ecosystem and this talent pool that I can make actually valuable intros to you. Which all goes to show, like, sometimes when we're, like, showing up every day and, like, creating content, we're like, what is the point of this? It's always sometimes, like, the things that happen later that, like, you have no idea what post they actually saw to get them to reach out for you to make that intro to a portfolio for another founder to be like, oh, my God, what is the council fund? Like, I want to go get a check from that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that's really cool. I mean, I think, like, one thing that I really struggle with is a lot of the members in our community are looking for jobs and they want referrals from me, or they want me to help them like carve out messages for cold intros, and how can they like network their way into like getting a warm intro like that. Do you have any thoughts or advice on what they should do? You've obviously worked at like amazing companies, and you're the person who would do these intros. Like what do you really look out for?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say my intros are highly curated. So it's like usually I know the founder really well, and I know someone who knows the person I'm referring really well, whether it's me or somebody I trust. And so I think for community leaders like yourself that like are leading a community like that, look for like the members that are really engaged and like over time kind of showing you how business savvy they are and how much they hustle. And then like make introductions for those. But I wouldn't promise introductions to everyone. Just because you want to be known for making really high quality introductions. And so like, for instance, there are people that I've met through the Council Angels community where it's like, I've gotten to know them now for like 4 years because they've been members in our community. And I'm fairly confident, like we've talked about every career move that they've made from like, one awesome company. I invested in a founder that like she was early in the council as one of our founding members. And then she was working at Uber, I believe at the time in like the early years. And then she or had worked there in the early years, and then she went to Flexport after that, and then she like launched her first company, and it was like at that point I will vouch for this person like 10x because we've like talked about all these like different deals together. I know how she thinks, I know how she works, I know how committed she is, I know how and why she left every job that she's been a part of because she genuinely told me when she like didn't need anything from me, and so that's the sort of person that like I want to do something for and be involved with, and I think as community leaders, like we play a really interesting role where like we get to know these people and we can actually aggregate and like find the best like matches within our communities. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's hard to scale though, really hard.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I was going to say like, it feels like the best thing for them to do is actually just like build really cool shit and be like a valuable member of society, because then they'll attract like-minded people who then they can build an authentic connection with, and then that person will authentically vouch for them. So it just boils down to the same thing of like,
you're so right.
Put shit out in the world, whether it's you're creating content, you're building projects, you're hustling, and be authentic, then you're going to naturally attract authentic connection that can make that authentic intro.
Totally. One of my close friends was in grad school studying design and trying to think about how he was going to get his first job in design, because he was pivoting his career from like sales to design through this grad school program. And in the middle of his grad school program, he started writing articles like redesigning apps, and he would like post like his like visuals of these redesigns as if he had actually redesigned it for the company, and that those companies actually started picking up on it and ended up offering him a job. So like before he was even done with his grad school program. So you're totally right. Like just putting something out there that's like, hey, you didn't ask me to do this, but I'm just gonna like do it for you anyways, or I'm gonna demystify something. Like that gets people's attention. So
yeah, and we live in a world where we now have these giant social media platforms that can take what we are creating and show it to so many people around the world that we could never like get connected to. And I think like that's why like building in public is such a big thing. And I want to encourage students specifically to do this. I think a lot of the time the people who like take this advice are like founders or, you know, aspiring founders of build in public, because they're trying to like reach, you know, big audiences to like sell a product. But hey, why don't you reach big audiences? Because you never know who wants to hire you. Like it's totally translatable, but it feels scarier because less people do it, but that's actually even better. There's just like less competition of other people, so there's less noise, and you can target like find the person that actually wants to authentically like hire you and finds your skills valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. I want to dive more into like an angel investing again. So I want to know more about like from a founder's perspective, right? When I as a founder am like pitching, what do you think are like 3 things that, you know, are standout things that you're looking for when you're, you know, writing a check? And what are like, maybe like you have some stories of like exceptional founders you've worked with that I love to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I look for 3 things in founders. Number 1 is resilience. Number 2 is mission. Number 3 is vision. So in resilience, I tend to look for proven operators, like somebody, and that doesn't mean you have to be like VP of Dropbox and then like launching your next company or something, or a previous founder like launching your next company. A proven operator could be like literally the first customer support person at a startup who talked to every single, or like the first 200 customers and knows customer service in and out and is building a company around that. So just somebody who has shown a lot of grit in their past experience and learned a lot of lessons and grown with some prior organization while playing a critical role in it. And so that's a proven operator to me. To me, that shows that they have resilience. They've stuck with something and they've been through the trenches, and they're not going to be shocked the first time that they come across an obstacle. They're not going to just give up because it's hard. And they're also okay with things being a little bit messy. Like if you've worked for a startup or a growing company before, you know that not every day feels very organized. And you can get the rug pulled out from underneath you in terms of like overarching strategy, and you just have to roll with it. And so I look for that level of resilience. And then mission is really important. So I like to invest in founders that are building in a space they feel really strongly about for some personal reason. Because again, I think that's going to be something that helps them get through those obstacles. I think if they're just like, oh, you know, I was studying like these 3 different markets that are totally unrelated, and I just found I think I can make the most money in this one. To me, I think money isn't a big enough motivator for them to really like see something through and see it be huge. And so I try to look for that personal connection. And then vision. Vision is really important to me because I want to make sure that they're focused on building something really big. They see the world as a different place in like 5 to 10 years with the technology that they're building. And they're not looking for like a get rich quick scheme. Like they don't want to be acquired in a year or 2 years. Of course, it's fine if that ends up happening and being the best path forward for the company. That's one thing, but I want them to be excited about spending the next 10 years of their life on the problem that they're solving. And so I just like to, you know, really understand like what's their end game, and you know, want to know that they're going big. So yeah,
that makes sense. I mean, it takes years for a company to truly make impact and to make an exit that's like very meaningful, not just for you as an investor, but just for the people that they're building for. Like,
totally.
How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis? Because this is obviously the founder perspective. I'm like, oh my God, I cannot wait that long. Like I want it now. Right. And you see a lot of your, you're going to see a lot of your returns like way later in your career.
Yeah. That is crazy to grapple with. For some reason, I'm somewhat comfortable with it. It's weird because you get these leading indicators, but you don't have real KPIs to show for yourself until like 10 years in. And so even now, like I'm 4 years into this journey at least, and I now have like 47 companies that I've invested in as an angel and a fund manager combined. And still, I only can say that I have leading indicators because I have markups. I have one like return that was significant, but everything else is like still paper markups. And so it's still something to talk about when you're raising your fund. But, really like at the end of the day, it's going to take several more years until I can really say like, all right, this was my net return on all of this work. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of tough for a lot of people to grapple with, just like that long turnaround for like actually seeing your results. But you really have to like lean into those leading indicators over time and like make adjustments if something isn't working. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I'm someone who has been angel investing for a while and I'm like ready to actually go do the hard thing of building my fund, like where do I find LPs? Like where's the first place I go?
Yeah, that's so super tricky because there are different types of LPs. So there are like, I think the biggest level of an LP is like an institution. So think like a bank or a pension fund, an endowment, university endowment. Those are all institutions and they are very hard to raise from for a first-time fund. Some of them have emerging manager programs or diverse GP programs where they're willing to invest in smaller funds. But they have so much capital, like usually billions of dollars, that they cannot invest in small funds or first-time funds because they physically cannot like handle that many relationships. So like if they're the one like investment manager trying to find all of the like GPs to invest in, they would have to invest in so many of them in order to like be working with emerging managers who typically have smaller funds. And I think it's very expensive for them to do a deal. So like I was chatting with an institutional LP the other day. They really want to invest in the council fund, but it's a $5 million fund and they want to write like a $500K check in, but it's going to cost them $50K in legal fees. And so they're like, we'd rather write a check into fund 2 because fund 2 will be bigger and we can write you like a $2.5 million check and then our $50K goes farther. So like those sort of LPs are very hard to close for a fund 1. And so like the next level down is like,
wait, I have a noob question. Yeah. What if I'm like, okay, sure, I'll just like do a 10 mil fund. Can I have my 2.5 mil?
Well, yeah, that's tricky too because they want to know that you have like a clear strategy and you're like sticking to your strategy. So like
you can't change your mind randomly.
Yeah, and these things happen like late in the process. Like I'm having this conversation with an LP and I've already like brought on 56 LPs to my existing strategy. So I can't just like throw it all up in the air and be like, all right, well, since you're interested. And some people do that at the early part of their fundraise. Like they'll start having those exploratory conversations. And if you really find an institution that's like, I'll be your anchor check right now, if you'll raise a bigger fund, like that's worth it. But if it's like in the 11th hour and they're trying to like change everything, it might be worth just pushing them to fund 2. And they might just say like, we can't do it with fund 1, like we want to do fund 2. And then the next level down from that is like family offices. And that is like a whole landscape where there are small family offices, there are big family offices, there are multifamily offices where like one investment group is investing on behalf of many families. These are really wealthy families that have usually, built their wealth in a particular vertical, whether it's real estate or agriculture, usually a lot of legacy industries, funny enough. And they are looking for ways to like grow their generational wealth or preserve it over time. And so they have professionals managing their family's portfolio. And that is very tricky. So like it's tricky because if you didn't come from a like wealthy background, like you don't know who these people are and they don't publish online. I'm a family office, like a couple people do, but most of them don't. And so you don't know who they are. You don't know what they're optimizing for. They don't have websites. And so really you're just kind of like picking through your network to figure out like who actually knows these people and like, and how can I get an introduction to them? Because it's also a way more traditional like group of people. And so they thrive on warm intros versus cold outreach. So I would just plan like this part of your fundraise if you want to raise from family offices and you're not in those networks, which I clearly was not. I'm like just uncovering that landscape now and I'm at like the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, I would just like a decent amount of time in your fundraise for just that, because the more conversations you have, you start getting in like from your primary network to your secondary network to your tertiary network. Those people like know the people. And then once you get like one of them on board, they're like, oh, I have 5 other friends with different family offices that want to be involved. And I think
ultimate networking play. Oh my God.
It's crazy. And I think Eric Bond has an amazing quote on this. I forget where he said it, but I don't know if I could say this out loud, but he said like LPs are like cockroaches. Like you find one and then like 10 more come out. And so I think that was on David Joe's like the blog or something. He interviewed him.
I just visualized that.
I know. Yeah. I remember that. Ever since I saw that, I was like, I'll remember that forever. And that's been true. Like once I meet one really helpful person, like they invest and then they're like, let me introduce you to these other 3, because now I have a lot of conviction in what you're doing. So it's a long game. I would not expect everything to happen overnight. And what I did was like, to your point earlier about just creating something and putting value out there to the world, like I spent 3 years building the council community, the angel community. And through that, I met various check writers. Like some of our members write 5K checks into companies. Some write 60K checks into companies. And I met people that invested up to $250K into my fund through that community. And it's because I created something that was like valuable for them and scaled it over time. I will say like not many of those checks from that community were of that size, but like I opened it up to them first. I gave them a first look at the council fund, and I gave them special minimums to participate because it was early. And so some people put a 25K check in, and then some people put 50K checks in, and like that together allowed me to raise that first close. Which was like just over $1 million. I think it was like 1.2 million. And I used that to then go invest in the first 10 companies. And then that helped me get more traction with those next conversations that led to the next conversations that led to the next. And this is why it's like there are periods of like high growth in the fundraise and then plateaus, because you're like, okay, wow, tapped out that network. Now what's next? And then you just have to navigate, and then you hit another one. And it could be something you're doing internally too. Like we had the opportunity to talk about our fund in Forbes last October. And of course, like then all of a sudden we got inbound interest in the fund. And so that was like another one of those like, up ramps like after we launched. And so there've just been multiple moments like that throughout the fundraise that have made a huge difference. So yeah.
Wow, this is like so beyond a world of what I know, but I feel like it's still very applicable, which is
totally.
Like networks are non-obvious, and you sometimes have to like run around and try to like find that cockroach that is going to like show you the way to all the rest of the cockroaches. Yeah. So it's really like putting yourself out there. And I have this like thing that I always say, which is like active networking versus passive networking. Active networking obviously is like talking to people, going up to them and like asking for intros. But then passive networking is like literally just like posting on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
It's like getting people to know you exist and like what you do so that you can get inbound. I really feel like doing both of that on a day-to-day basis can like be very exhausting. Like how do you manage that with also building relationships with people in your community and also the founders that you're trying to like convince them to take your money? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, part of it is time management. So I've like put some things in place that I did not have in place like a year and a half ago or a year ago. And that has made a huge difference. So we're now like very much on a schedule with our angel community where it's like every Thursday our newsletter goes out with the top 2 to 3 deals we're sharing with them. Following Tuesday, we do live pitch meetings. I have a very tiny team that's like focused on making sure that we have the right deals in the newsletter, and then we have the right deals and like the founders know when to show up for the live pitches. And so now that's on like rinse and repeat every week. And then we do a deal review on Mondays as a team, me and Shreya and Jay. And we kind of prepare in advance, like which are the deals at top of funnel we want to focus on. And then we agree how to route them in that meeting. And then I try to do like first calls with founders on a specific day if I haven't talked to them before. And then if it's a portfolio founder, or a second call with a founder I'm really interested in investing in and I'm like getting into the details with them, or if it's an LP that's considering the fund, I basically open up my calendar to like all the other space in my week. So my schedule gets a little crazy because it's like Mondays are kind of like Monday afternoons are defined. Wednesdays are packed with first calls with founders, sometimes Thursdays. And then everything else is just kind of like scattered with like the people that I've already like, that are kind of like a little bit higher signal in my network. They've like made it to that next level of like, okay, we might be working together. And so that's helped, just like even having like a couple things like time blocked in there has helped the other mess of it get a little bit less messy. And I think also just there's like a mental health like part of it too, where like you just have a lot of balls in the air. And I think like just giving yourself grace and also letting yourself like step away for a moment if you need it to like think about the big picture is really, really helpful. Like every time I like really take a weekend to like decompress, I come back stronger on Monday because I'm like, wow, like I'll just be like, a hamster on a wheel all week, just like getting through all this stuff. And then I'll be like, oh my gosh, like everything is on fire. And then over the weekend, I'm like, wow, things are actually going pretty great. If I like step back and I know what my top 3 priorities should be next week. But if I don't do that, I feel like sometimes I will just like start responding. I'll be in like responsive mode versus proactive mode. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just taking a weekend to like reflect can bring so much clarity of like, okay, yes, it may seem like a lot of stuff happened, but most of it's noise. Actually, I still know my priorities were, I still achieved that. I feel good about myself, and you can kind of like cut through the noise yourself that way. So that is great advice. Do you feel like being a woman in venture has held you back at any points? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's, there's no way I could say, no to that question. Like the stats are so staggering for female VCs and especially emerging manager VCs. Like it's already hard for anybody to raise a fund right now. Literally, I think I've seen a couple people post this chart that it was just like the capital raised in Q1, and literally like there is nothing for women VCs that like raised capital last quarter. Or maybe it was Q4 of last year or something. And it was like the whole industry went down, but then like women went to zero. And so I definitely think it affects my ability to fundraise. It affects the networks and the rooms that I have access to. That said, like there have been people that have been like super helpful throughout the process that are super connected, both men and women. So it's just like a matter of finding the right people that like see your vision and and just going for that. And I will share one thing that's like a little unfortunate, which is, our community is right now all female and it's all operators. So we vet every single person that wants to join our community, make sure that they could be
focused on women specifically.
Focused on women.
So cool.
But we want to make sure they're operators. Like they all have something to add to founders and want to be helpful to founders. They have some individual like pocket of deal flow, even if it's small. Through that process, wait, I lost my track of thought. Wait, what was this?
Just like, I think you were sharing a story of like what it means to be a woman in venture.
Yes. Okay. So, this community is like, this angel community is a big differentiator for us, especially in terms of deal flow and ability to support portfolio founders. But when I went to go pitch the fund and led with that, like I had like pictures of all the women in the council community in my deck. And I was like so inspired by that because I'm like, they're all so diverse. Like we have such an amazing community. They're all working at awesome companies. So I had like one slide that was like all their faces. And then the next slide that was like the logos of all the companies that they work for. And I just got every single LP call. I was just like completely like clobbered with questions about the community and if it was a distraction from the fund and like why I have a community and all this stuff. And then I removed the slide with the pictures of all the faces. Yeah. And I kept the slide about and I said like we have an operator community and took away like anything like super female related in my pitch deck. No one blinks an eye and they're like, we love the operator community. We love this. So like, it's definitely like, that was a real test to me where I was like, wow, like my fundraise started taking off as soon as I like removed that, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, like I think if you're not leaning like super heavily into like diversity as your, like we invest in all founders. So I would definitely keep that slide in if it was like, we're only investing in female founders, but people kept getting confused and thinking that I only invest in female founders because I have a female community. And like that to me, I was just like, I can't keep spending the whole time that I'm trying to be talking about the fund, talking about the community, which is an asset to the fund. And so, yeah, that was a painful lesson to learn. But it's just like one of those things we got to be real with ourselves about, like, when you're building a business, framing is everything. So.
Oh my God, that's truly shocking to me. I'm like, every time I think that we've come forward as a society and we're making progress, I'm reminded we are not, and especially not moving as fast enough. And hey, that's just the reality of like a lot of companies and people are like, yes, DEI, like, yes, we want to support diversity, we want to support women. But when it actually comes down to the actual moment when money needs to be given and someone needs to be put in their trust, and it's like, that's when the real cards are shown. And in those moments, we don't talk about those moments enough. but they happen and they're real. And as you said, like a business is a business, you got to do what's best for your business.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's two ways you could do it. You could take that feedback and you could do nothing about it, or you could take that feedback and do better business, because what are you doing? The more money you get from LPs, you're actually supporting the women in your community, helping them build wealth and helping them get more of a place in venture.
That's the goal.
That's how you're going to solve that problem.
Yeah,
you know, not convincing people who are not going to listen to you regardless.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think it was unconscious bias versus conscious, because I mean, I got it from men and women alike, like, and I don't think they knew they were doing it. And then I just just tweaking that in my deck, like they stopped focusing on that so much. So it was really like unfortunate, interesting, but I am glad that I found that out, because it was like, okay, now I can very clearly like just focus on the core business in these discussions. So
which is the main thing that you're doing. And
right.
It's honestly interesting, because I think a lot of the time we're like, oh, men are the problem, but no, it's like the society is the problem. Like messaging and framing is the problem. We're both, you know, like both men and women are responsible for this, and we all actually need to work better to remove that unconscious bias. But it's so tough. Like, obviously, I don't have a good answer for this, and you're figuring it out right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is crazy. If you could go back in time and tell your younger self some advice, what would you tell her?
Okay, that's a good one. I think it's just like around pleasing people. Like, I think when I was younger, like I always wanted to be popular and like wanted like people to like me. And of course, like everybody wants to be liked, but I think I sometimes would like put time into the wrong relationships with like people that weren't actually like reciprocating. And so I think that's probably something that like it's taken me a long time as an adult to like kind of determine, even early in a friendship or a business relationship, like if it's a one-way street, it might not be worth your time. And just like recognizing that more early on versus like being the person that's constantly like reaching out or constantly doing something for the other person, or like, just being the one that's really like carrying the whole thing, and just like being true to myself. I think that's really like what I've learned mostly as an adult that I wish I knew when I was younger.
Yeah. And I can't imagine how many women are in your DMs all day, like, because you're totally inspiring. So
that's sweet.
It's good that you are confident of yourself and know when to say no, and respectful of your own time, which is something that, you know, we can all get better at every day. Cool. Where can we find you?
So I'm on Twitter. It's Amber Illig, AMBERILLIG. And then the council is the Council Cap, short for the Council Capital. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Well, so happy that you came on. I learned so much about investing, being a founder, and like a lot of these things that you talked about are like very tactable to like so many parts of, you know, our careers, even beyond just, you know, the startup community. But, yeah, really, really insightful. Thank you for coming.